The penthouse apartment on the 47th floor of the Castellano Tower was a monument to wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline, where millions of lights flickered like earthbound stars. Italian marble covered the floors, reflecting the glow of crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Every piece of furniture had been selected by designers whose names appeared in architectural magazines. Every painting on the walls was an original, guarded by insurance policies with seven-figure valuations. But Rosa Delgado saw none of the beauty as she pushed her cleaning cart through the mahogany doors at exactly 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening in late October. She saw only the work that needed doing, the surfaces that required attention, the routines that had kept her employed at Sterling Luxury Services for the past 11 years. Rosa was 43 years old, with hands weathered from decades of scrubbing and polishing. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, her uniform pressed and spotless despite the physical demands of her work. She cleaned 7 different residences throughout the week, each one belonging to people whose lives existed in a stratosphere so far removed from her own that they might as well have been different species. The Castellano penthouse was her Thursday assignment, and in the 6 months she'd been servicing this particular residence, she developed a precise routine. Start with the kitchen, work through the living spaces, handle the bathrooms, finish with the bedrooms. 3 hours of focused work, then on to her evening job at the hospital, where she cleaned patient rooms until midnight. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, all to support her mother's medical treatments and keep her teenage son in a decent school. Rosa understood sacrifice in ways that wealthy people never would. She understood what it meant to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, to calculate bus fare down to the exact quarter, to know that one unexpected expense could topple her entire financial existence. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Rosa had learned long ago not to look too closely at her employers' lives. She was background noise, invisible help that arrived and departed without drawing attention. The wealthy preferred it that way. They wanted their spaces cleaned, their lives managed, but they didn't want to acknowledge the people who made that comfort possible. The Castellano penthouse belonged to Marco Castellano, though Rosa had only seen him 3 times in 6 months. He was always leaving as she arrived, impeccably dressed in suits that probably cost more than her annual income. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, cold eyes that assessed and dismissed her in the same glance, a presence that made the air feel heavier when he entered a room. Rosa knew who Marco Castellano was. Everyone in the city knew. His name appeared in newspapers, always connected to legitimate businesses, real estate developments, construction projects. But the whispers told different stories. Stories about organized crime, about violence conducted with corporate efficiency, about a man who controlled significant portions of the city's underground economy. Rosa didn't care about any of that. She cared about doing her job competently, collecting her paycheck, and maintaining the professional distance that kept her safe. She'd learned early in her cleaning career that curiosity about wealthy clients' lives was a liability. See nothing, hear nothing, exist only as a pair of hands that made messes disappear. But tonight, something was different. Rosa noticed it immediately as she entered the apartment. The usual silence felt heavier, weighted with a tension she couldn't identify. The kitchen showed signs of recent use, unusual for a residence where most meals seemed to be catered or eaten elsewhere. A small plate sat in the sink with remnants of what looked like a child's dinner, macaroni and cheese, the cheap box kind that didn't match the penthouse's sophisticated aesthetic. Rosa's maternal instincts activated before her professional training could suppress them. She knew Marco Castellano had a daughter, Isabella, 9 years old. Rosa had seen her exactly twice in 6 months, both times from a distance. A small figure with dark hair like her father's, always moving quickly through the penthouse as if trying not to be noticed. The wealthy had nannies for their children, tutors and drivers, and entire staffs dedicated to managing the complex logistics of raising kids while maintaining busy professional lives. Rosa assumed Isabella was cared for by such people, that her brief glimpses of the girl were simply because their schedules rarely intersected. But something about that cheap macaroni and cheese plate bothered Rosa as she filled her bucket with cleaning solution. It spoke of a child making her own dinner, of a 9-year-old managing meals that should have been prepared by hired help or attentive parents. Rosa began her usual routine, working through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. But her attention kept drifting toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. She could hear something, faint sounds that didn't belong in the empty penthouse. Movement. Quiet footsteps. The muffled sound of a television playing at low volume. Isabella must be home. Unusual, but not unprecedented. Sometimes children were present during Rosa's cleaning shifts, absorbed in homework or video games, barely acknowledging her existence. Rosa would simply work around her, maintaining the professional invisibility that kept her employed. But as Rosa moved into the living room with her vacuum cleaner, something made her pause. The sound wasn't coming from Isabella's bedroom. It was coming from the master bedroom, Marco Castellano's private space. And mixed with the television's murmur was another sound. Crying. Very quiet, almost inaudible, but unmistakable to someone who had raised a child of her own. Rosa stood frozen, her hand on the vacuum cleaner's handle, her maternal instincts warring with her professional training. Children cried. It was normal. Isabella was probably watching a sad movie or dealing with typical childhood disappointments. It wasn't Rosa's business. She was here to clean, not to involve herself in her employer's family dynamics. But that crying didn't sound like disappointment or sadness over a movie. It sounded like fear. Rosa released the vacuum cleaner and walked quietly toward the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling into the darkened hallway. She approached slowly, her heart rate accelerating for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. Through the gap in the door, Rosa could see Isabella sitting on the enormous king-size bed, her small frame almost swallowed by the expensive linens. The television was on, showing some animated movie, but Isabella wasn't watching it. She was staring at the bedroom door, the main entrance to the bedroom, her entire body rigid with tension. Rosa noticed the girl's posture immediately. Isabella sat with her back pressed against the headboard, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs. It was a defensive position, the kind Rosa had seen in documentaries about trauma. The kind that spoke of a child, trying to make herself as small as possible. Isabella's face was tear-stained, her dark eyes wide and hyper-focused on that bedroom door. She was listening for something, waiting for something, and every few seconds, her small body would flinch, responding to sounds Rosa couldn't even hear. Rosa's professional training evaporated. She was no longer the invisible cleaning woman. She was a mother looking at a terrified child. "Isabella!" Rosa said softly, pushing the door open slightly wider. The girl's head snapped toward her, eyes going even wider with surprise and fear. For a moment, Isabella looked like she might scream. Then recognition dawned, and some of the tension in her small frame eased slightly. "You're the cleaning lady," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Yes, honey. I'm Rosa." She stepped fully into the room, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "Are you okay?" Isabella's eyes darted back toward the bedroom door, then returned to Rosa. The girl's hands were trembling where they gripped her knees. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the kind of response that had been trained into her through repetition. Rosa had heard that same tone from her own son when he was being bullied at school and trying to hide it. The desperate attempt to appear normal when everything was falling apart. "You don't look fine, sweetheart." Rosa moved closer to the bed, her maternal instincts overriding every professional boundary she'd carefully maintained for 11 years. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not crying," Isabella lied, even as fresh tears tracked down her cheeks. Rosa sat down carefully on the edge of the massive bed, maintaining enough distance to not feel threatening. Up close, she could see details that made her chest tighten with concern. Isabella's fingernails were bitten down to the quick. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, speaking of insufficient sleep. Her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, tangled and neglected. This wasn't a child being cared for by nannies and tutors. This was a child surviving alone in a penthouse that felt more like a prison than a home. "Isabella," Rosa said gently, "where is your father?" "Working," the girl whispered. "He's always working." "And where are the people who take care of you?" "Your nanny." Isabella's expression flickered with something Rosa couldn't identify. Shame, maybe. Or fear. "I don't have a nanny anymore. Daddy said I'm old enough to take care of myself." Rosa felt anger rising in her chest. 9 years old was not old enough to take care of yourself. 9 years old was still childhood, still requiring adult supervision and care and the kind of attention that couldn't be delegated or dismissed. How long have you been alone here? Isabella's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 3 weeks. Since Maria left. 3 weeks. This child had been essentially abandoned in this massive penthouse for 3 weeks, making her own meals, managing her own existence, dealing with whatever fears kept her crying in her father's bedroom instead of sleeping in her own. Why are you in your father's room instead of your own? Rosa asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Isabella's entire body tensed again, her eyes fixed on the bedroom door with an intensity that made Rosa's skin prickle. Because, the girl whispered, I can lock this door from the inside. My room doesn't have a lock. The statement landed like a physical blow. Rosa's experience as a mother, her years of cleaning houses and observing the lives of the wealthy, her fundamental understanding of childhood fear, all converged into a single horrifying realization. Isabella wasn't just lonely. She was terrified, and she was terrified of something that came through doors at night. Isabella, Rosa said carefully, keeping her voice gentle despite the rage building in her chest. What are you afraid of? The girl's lips trembled. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice so quiet Rosa had to lean closer to hear, Isabella said, The man who comes at night? Rosa's blood turned to ice. What man? Isabella's hands tightened around her knees until her knuckles turned white. I don't know his name, but he comes after Daddy leaves for work. He has a key. He comes into my room, and he tells me not to tell anyone, and he touches my hair, and he says things, and I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make them less real. Isabella was crying openly now, her small body shaking with the force of emotions she'd been holding inside for weeks. Rosa felt the world tilt beneath her. She'd walked into this penthouse expecting her usual routine, 3 hours of cleaning followed by her hospital shift. Instead, she'd stumbled into every parent's nightmare. How many times has this man come? Rosa asked, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. I don't know. Lots of times. Sometimes he just looks at me. Sometimes he sits on my bed and talks. Last night Isabella's voice broke completely. Last night, he tried to get in the bathroom while I was taking a bath. Rosa's hands clenched into fists. She thought about her own son, about what she would do if anyone threatened him this way. She thought about Marco Castellano's reputation, about the violence he reportedly commanded with casual efficiency. And she thought about how that dangerous man had somehow failed to protect the most important person in his world. Does your father know? Rosa asked, though she already knew the answer. Isabella shook her head frantically. I can't tell him. The man said if I tell anyone, something bad will happen to Daddy. He said people are watching, and if I say anything, Daddy will get hurt. Classic predator tactics. Isolate the victim, create fear, ensure silence through threats that exploited a child's love for her parent. Rosa had read about these patterns in news articles about abuse cases. She'd never imagined she'd encounter them directly. Isabella, Rosa said firmly, leaning forward and looking directly into the terrified girl's eyes. Listen to me, very carefully. What this man is doing is wrong. Very wrong. And the things he told you, about not telling anyone, about bad things happening to your daddy, those are all lies. He told you those things to keep you quiet. But the truth is, the only way to protect you and your father is to tell someone what's happening. But what if he's right? Isabella's voice cracked. What if something happens to Daddy because I told? Rosa reached out slowly, giving Isabella time to pull away if she wanted. When the girl didn't flinch, Rosa gently took her small hand. Your daddy is a very powerful man. Trust me when I say that nothing is going to happen to him. But you, sweetheart, you need to be protected. And that starts with telling the truth. Isabella's fingers gripped Rosa's hand like a lifeline. Will you help me? Rosa didn't hesitate. Every professional boundary she carefully maintained, every rule about not involving herself in clients' personal lives, every instinct to remain invisible and forgettable, all of it evaporated in the face of a terrified 9-year-old asking for help. Yes, Rosa said with absolute certainty. I'm going to help you. Rosa's mind raced through possibilities as she sat on the edge of Marco Castellano's bed, Isabella's small hand still clutching hers. Every decision she made in the next few minutes could determine whether this child was saved or whether Rosa herself became another casualty of a situation far beyond her pay grade. She was a cleaning woman, 43 years old, working 2 jobs, barely keeping her own life together. She had no authority, no power, no resources beyond her maternal instincts, and a growing fury that someone had dared to hurt this child. But she also knew that Marco Castellano was not a man you approached lightly. His reputation for violence wasn't speculation, it was documented fact. People who crossed him disappeared. Businesses that competed with him mysteriously burned down. Witnesses in legal proceedings against his interests suddenly developed amnesia or relocated to different states without warning. Rosa had no illusions about what kind of man her employer was, but she also understood something fundamental about human nature. The most dangerous men often had the deepest vulnerabilities, and for men like Marco Castellano, those vulnerabilities usually centered on family. "Isabella," Rosa said gently, "I need you to tell me everything you can remember about this man. What does he look like?" Isabella's eyes darted toward the bedroom door again, as if saying the words might somehow summon him. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "He's tall, taller than Daddy. He has blonde hair, really short, like soldiers have, and he has a scar." She touched her own left eyebrow. "Right here. It's white, like someone cut him a long time ago." Rosa committed every detail to memory. "What about his voice? Does he have an accent?" "Kind of. He sounds like the men from Daddy's business meetings. The ones who come here sometimes. They talk differently than Americans, but I don't know from where." Eastern European, Rosa thought. Many of Castellano's business associates came from that region, connections formed through decades of international criminal enterprise. The detail narrowed the possibilities, but also made the situation more dangerous. This wasn't some random predator who'd found access to the building. This was someone connected to Marco's organization, someone who felt protected enough to repeatedly violate the boss's own home. "How does he get in?" Rosa asked. "You said he has a key." Isabella nodded. "He opens the front door like he's supposed to be here. The first time, I thought maybe Daddy had sent him. But then he came into my room and locked the door, and I knew something was wrong." Rosa's jaw clenched. The violation was methodical, calculated. This man had keys, knew Marco's schedule, understood when Isabella would be alone and vulnerable. It suggested someone with inside knowledge, possibly someone on Marco's security team or someone with access to building management. "When does he usually come?" "After 8, sometimes 9. Never before Daddy leaves for his evening meetings." Isabella's grip on Rosa's hand tightened. "Tonight is Thursday. He comes on Thursdays. That's why I locked myself in here." Rosa checked her watch. It was 6:45. She had just over an hour, maybe less, before this predator would arrive, expecting to find Isabella alone and accessible. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated options. She could call the police, but what would she tell them? That she'd been told by a 9-year-old that a man with a key came to the apartment? Without proof, without witnesses, it would be her word against whatever story this man and his associates constructed. And if he was connected to Marco's organization, there was every possibility that police contacts had already been compromised. She could try to reach Marco directly, but Rosa had no way to contact him. She'd never been given his personal number, had never needed to communicate with him beyond the brief encounters when their paths crossed. And even if she found a way to reach him, would he believe his cleaning woman over someone in his trusted circle? The real question was more fundamental. If Rosa involved authorities or tried to navigate official channels, Isabella would be left vulnerable during the hours or days it took for bureaucracy to respond. And in that window of vulnerability, the predator could disappear, destroy evidence, or worse, accelerate his abuse before anyone could intervene. Rosa made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation she developed over 43 years of life. She was going to handle this herself, at least for tonight. She was going to protect this child the way she'd protect her own son, and damn the consequences. "Isabella," Rosa said firmly, "you're going to stay in this room with the door locked. I'm going to be right outside, cleaning like normal. When this man arrives, I'm going to see who he is. And then I'm going to make sure he never comes back. Isabella's eyes widened. But he's dangerous. What if he hurts you? Rosa thought about her own son, about the lengths she'd go to protect him from harm. She thought about her mother, dying slowly from cancer because they couldn't afford better treatment, and how that helplessness had nearly destroyed Rosa's spirit. She thought about all the times in her life when she'd been powerless, invisible, dismissed as unimportant by people with wealth and influence. Tonight, she refused to be powerless. "Sweetheart," Rosa said with more confidence than she felt, "I've spent my whole life being invisible to people like the man who's been hurting you. Tonight, that's going to work in our favor." She stood up from the bed, her mind already formulating a plan. The penthouse had security cameras in the common areas. She'd seen them during her cleaning shifts. If this man was entering through the front door with a key, there would be footage. Rosa just needed to make sure that footage captured something incriminating enough to destroy him. "Lock this door behind me," Rosa instructed. "Don't open it for anyone except me or your father. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what threats they make. You stay in this room until I tell you it's safe. Understand?" Isabella nodded, tears still streaming down her face, but something else flickering in her expression now. Hope, maybe, or the desperate belief that someone finally cared enough to intervene. Rosa walked to the bedroom door, then paused and turned back. "Isabella, one more question. Has this man ever actually touched you? I mean, has he?" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the worst possibilities that haunted every parent's nightmares. "He touches my hair," Isabella whispered, "and he puts his hand on my shoulder. And last night, when I was in the bathroom, he tried to open the door, but I'd locked it and I heard him standing outside for a long time. But he hasn't. He hasn't done the really bad things. Not yet. Not yet." The two words that contained all the horror of predation in progress. This man was escalating, testing boundaries, grooming Isabella for worse violations that would come if no one intervened. Rosa nodded grimly. "Lock the door. I'll knock 3 times when it's safe." She stepped into the hallway and waited until she heard the metallic click of the lock engaging. Then she returned to her cleaning cart, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the handle. For the next hour, Rosa cleaned the penthouse with meticulous attention to detail, but her mind was entirely focused on the plan taking shape. She positioned herself in the living room, where she had clear sight lines to both the front entrance and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She made sure her cleaning supplies were arranged in ways that looked natural but would give her quick access to potential weapons if needed. A bottle of industrial-strength cleaning solution that could blind someone if sprayed in their eyes. A heavy metal mop handle that could serve as a club. Her phone, fully charged, positioned in her uniform pocket where she could activate the camera recording with a single motion. Rosa had never been a violent person. She'd raised her son to solve problems with words, not fists. She'd walked away from confrontations her entire life, understanding that survival often meant swallowing pride and avoiding conflict. But tonight was different. Tonight she was standing between a predator and a child, and Rosa discovered that maternal instinct could transform the meekest person into something fierce and uncompromising. At 8:15, Rosa heard the distinctive sound of a key entering the front door lock. Her entire body tensed as she watched the door swing open. The man who entered was exactly as Isabella had described. Tall, probably 6'3", with military-style blonde hair and a white scar bisecting his left eyebrow. He wore expensive clothes, a dark suit that suggested professional status rather than menial work. His movements were confident, unhurried, the bearing of someone who belonged in this space. He didn't notice Rosa immediately. His attention was focused on the hallway leading to the bedrooms, his expression one of anticipation that made Rosa's stomach turn. This was a man accustomed to having access, accustomed to being unchallenged. Rosa made a small noise, deliberately knocking over a cleaning bottle. The man's head snapped toward her, surprise flickering across his features before being replaced by annoyance. "Who the hell are you?" Rosa kept her expression carefully neutral, playing the role she perfected over 11 years. Invisible help. Unimportant background. Someone easily dismissed and ignored. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm Rosa, from Sterling Luxury Services. I clean this apartment every Thursday evening." The man's eyes narrowed as he assessed her. Rosa could see him calculating, trying to determine if her presence was a problem or merely an inconvenience. "Does Castellano know you're here?" "Yes, sir. This is my regular schedule. Mr. Castellano arranged for Thursday evening cleaning 6 months ago." A partial lie. Marco Castellano had arranged for cleaning services, but Rosa doubted he paid attention to specific schedules or which particular cleaning woman serviced his residence. To men like him, domestic help was interchangeable and forgettable. The man relaxed slightly, apparently deciding Rosa wasn't a threat. "How much longer will you be?" "Maybe 30 minutes, sir. I just need to finish the living area and then the bathrooms." Rosa kept her voice professionally neutral, her body language submissive. Every instinct screamed at her to attack this predator, to hurt him the way he'd hurt Isabella. But she needed proof first. She needed him to reveal himself in ways that couldn't be explained away. "Fine. Stay out of the bedrooms." The man moved toward the hallway, his intentions obvious. Rosa's hand moved to her phone, activating the camera recording with practiced ease. She positioned herself perfectly, the angle capturing both the man's face and his path toward Isabella's bedroom. "Sir," Rosa called out, her voice uncertain, playing the role of confused, help-seeking clarification. "I'm sorry, but I was told the young lady wanted me to change her bedding tonight. Should I skip that room?" The man stopped, turning back with visible frustration. "What young lady?" Rosa blinked innocently. "Mr. Castellano's daughter, Isabella. She called the cleaning service this afternoon and requested fresh sheets. Is she not home?" She watched his face carefully, seeing the micro-expressions that revealed his thoughts. Confusion about why Isabella would call the service. Calculation about whether this complicated his plans. Growing irritation at this unexpected obstacle. "I haven't seen her," he said finally. "Maybe she's with friends." "Oh, that's strange. Her bedroom light is on. I thought I heard the television earlier." Rosa tilted her head, the picture of helpful confusion. "Should I knock and check if she needs anything?" "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. The man visibly forced himself to soften his tone. "I mean, if she's here, she's probably doing homework or something. Best not to disturb her. You can skip the bedroom tonight." Rosa nodded obediently. "Of course, sir. I'll just finish the common areas then." The man hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to access Isabella and the complication of Rosa's presence. After a long moment, he pulled out his phone and moved toward the far corner of the living room, speaking in low tones that Rosa couldn't quite hear. She continued cleaning, moving methodically through her tasks while keeping the man in her peripheral vision. Her phone was still recording, capturing him pacing the living room, checking his watch repeatedly, occasionally glancing toward the bedroom hallway with undisguised frustration. At 8:45, the man's phone buzzed. He answered immediately, his body language shifting to something more deferential. Rosa could hear fragments of the conversation, enough to understand he was speaking with someone more senior in whatever organizational hierarchy he occupied. "Yes, I understand. Tomorrow instead. No complications. Yes, sir." He ended the call and stood still for a moment, his jaw clenched with visible anger. Then he turned toward Rosa with a false smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need to leave. Make sure you lock up properly when you're finished." "Of course, sir. Have a good evening." Rosa watched him exit through the front door, waiting until his footsteps faded completely down the hallway before allowing herself to breathe properly. Her hands were shaking as she stopped the recording, checking to make sure it had captured everything clearly. The video showed a man with access to Marco Castellano's penthouse, entering without permission or announcement, lying about knowing whether Isabella was home, and showing suspicious interest in the bedroom hallway. It wasn't proof of actual abuse, but combined with Isabella's testimony, it established a pattern that couldn't be easily dismissed. Rosa walked quickly to the master bedroom and knocked 3 times. "Isabella, it's me. You can open the door." The lock clicked and Isabella appeared, her face pale but her eyes searching Rosa's expression for reassurance. "Did he come?" "Yes, sweetheart. But he's gone now. And I got everything recorded." Rosa held up her phone. "This man is never going to hurt you again. I promise you that. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Isabella threw her arms around Rosa's waist, sobbing with relief and residual terror. Rosa held her, feeling the child's small body shake against her, and made a silent vow that she would see this through no matter what it cost her. Isabella, I need you to tell me something very important. Do you know this man's name? Have you ever heard your father mention him? Isabella pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. I don't know his name, but I've seen him before at Daddy's office. He works for Daddy. I think he's security, or something like that. Rosa's blood ran cold. A member of Marco's security team. Someone with legitimate access to keys, schedules, security codes. Someone whose presence in the building wouldn't trigger questions or suspicions. Someone who'd used his position to identify and exploit the most devastating vulnerability in his employer's life. The betrayal was calculated and monstrous. Marco Castellano had entrusted his daughter's safety to his organization, and someone within that organization had used that trust as cover for predation. Rosa understood that she was now holding information that could destroy lives, including potentially her own. Men like Marco Castellano didn't respond well to discovering betrayal, especially betrayal this personal. The violence that would follow her revelation would be swift and brutal. But she also understood that staying silent would mean abandoning Isabella to continued abuse. And Rosa couldn't live with that choice. Isabella, I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down everything you can remember about what this man has done. Every time he came, what he said, what he did. Can you do that? Isabella nodded, her expression solemn with understanding. To give to the police. Maybe. But first, to give to your father. Because he needs to know what's been happening in his own home while he was too busy working to pay attention. The judgment in Rosa's voice was unmistakable. She'd seen too many parents prioritize wealth and power over the fundamental responsibility of protecting their children. Marco Castellano's reputation for ruthlessness meant nothing if he couldn't keep his own daughter safe. Rosa settled Isabella at the desk in the master bedroom with paper and pens, then returned to finish her cleaning routine. Her mind was already racing ahead to the next problem. How to contact Marco Castellano. How to present this information in ways that would penetrate his defenses and force him to confront the truth. At 9:30, as Rosa was preparing to leave, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. This is Rosa. The voice was male, deep, carrying unmistakable authority. Yes. Who's calling? This is Marco Castellano. My security team informed me that someone other than my usual personnel was in my apartment tonight. I'm calling to verify your employment. Rosa's heart hammered. This was the moment. She could play it safe, confirm her employment and leave. Or she could take the risk that might save Isabella and potentially get Rosa killed. Mr. Castellano, Rosa said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to speak with you in person. Tonight. About your daughter. There was a long pause. When Marco spoke again, his voice had dropped to a register that probably terrified most people. What about my daughter? Not over the phone. But I promise you, what I have to tell you is something you need to hear immediately. It concerns her safety. Another pause, longer this time. Rosa could almost hear Marco's mind working through possibilities, assessing threats, calculating risks. Where are you now? Still in your apartment. With Isabella. Put her on the phone. Rosa walked to the master bedroom where Isabella was still writing, her handwriting careful and precise as she documented her nightmare. Your father wants to talk to you. Isabella's eyes widened with fear. Is he angry? I don't know, sweetheart, but I'll be right here. Isabella took the phone with trembling hands. Daddy. Rosa could hear Marco's voice through the speaker, speaking in Italian, rapid-fire questions that Isabella answered in the same language. The conversation lasted several minutes, Isabella's responses becoming increasingly tearful as she apparently confirmed details about Rosa's presence and behavior. Finally, Isabella handed the phone back. Daddy wants to talk to you again. Rosa took the phone. Yes, Mr. Castellano? My daughter tells me you've been kind to her, that you discovered something that frightened her and you're trying to help. Marco's voice was carefully controlled, but Rosa could hear the undercurrent of rage building beneath the surface. I'm 15 minutes away. You will wait there. You will not leave. You will not call anyone else. Do you understand? I understand. If you've done anything to harm my daughter, if this is some attempt at extortion or manipulation, I want you to understand very clearly what will happen to you." "Mr. Castellano," Rosa interrupted, her own anger finally breaking through. "I'm a cleaning woman. I work 2 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatments and keep my son in school. I have nothing you could possibly want except information about who has been violating your home and terrorizing your daughter while you were too busy with business to notice she was suffering." The silence on the other end was absolute. Rosa had just spoken to a Mafia boss with the same tone she'd use on her teenage son when he needed to be corrected. It was possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever done. 15 minutes, Marco said finally and ended the call. Rosa stood in the living room, her legs suddenly weak as the adrenaline that had sustained her for the past 3 hours began to fade. She just challenged one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast, accused him of negligence, and demanded he face uncomfortable truths about his own failures. She might not survive the next hour. Isabella appeared in the hallway, holding several pages of handwritten testimony. "Is Daddy angry?" Rosa knelt down, looking the girl in the eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, but not at you and not at me. He's angry at the situation. And that's good, because it means he's going to fix it. What if he doesn't believe me?" Rosa held up her phone. "I have video of that man entering this apartment tonight. I have proof he lied about knowing you were home. And I have your written statement. Your father will believe you because the evidence doesn't lie." Isabella's lower lip trembled. "Thank you for helping me. No one else did." The simple statement broke Rosa's heart. How many adults had failed this child? How many people had noticed signs and said nothing, prioritized their own comfort over her safety, dismissed her subtle cries for help? Sometimes, sweetheart, we have to be brave enough to ask for help before people know we need it. And sometimes, we have to trust that there are still good people in the world who will do the right thing even when it's hard. They waited together in the living room, Rosa holding Isabella's hand while monitoring the front door. At exactly 9:45, the lock turned and Marco Castellano entered his penthouse with 4 men behind him. Rosa had seen Marco 3 times before during their brief encounters, but she'd never truly looked at him. Now, seeing him in the context of being Isabella's father rather than her employer, she noticed details she'd missed. The exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of constant vigilance, the way his gaze immediately found his daughter and softened infinitesimally before hardening again as he turned his attention to Rosa. Marco Castellano was 52 years old, though he could have passed for younger. His dark hair was touched with silver that somehow made him more distinguished rather than aged. He wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Rosa's car, and he moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd survived decades in a world where showing weakness meant death. "Isabella," he said quietly, "go to your room." "But Daddy, now!" Isabella looked at Rosa with frightened eyes. Rosa squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's okay. Your father and I need to talk. I'll still be here when we're done." After Isabella disappeared down the hallway, Marco turned his full attention to Rosa. The 4 men with him had positioned themselves strategically around the living room, blocking exits. Rosa recognized the formation from movies and television shows. They were establishing control, eliminating her options for escape. She was trapped in a room with 5 dangerous men, holding information that would ignite violence beyond anything she'd ever witnessed. But she was also a mother who had promised a terrified child that someone would finally protect her. Rosa met Marco's steel-gray eyes without flinching. "Mr. Castellano, your daughter has been sexually abused by someone in your organization. Someone with keys to this apartment. Someone who comes here every Thursday night when he knows she's alone. And I have proof." Marco's expression didn't change, but Rosa saw his hands clench into fists. "Show me." Rosa pulled out her phone and played the recording. Marco watched in absolute silence, his face carved from stone. When the video ended, she handed him Isabella's written statement. Marco read slowly, his jaw clenching tighter with each line. When he finished, he looked up at the man standing nearest to him. "Get me the Thursday night security logs for the past 6 months. I want to know every person who accessed this building on Thursday evenings. And I want it in 10 minutes. The man pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice urgent. Marco turned back to Rosa. "You recognize this man in the video?" "No, sir." But Isabella said she's seen him at your office. She thinks he's part of your security team. Marco's eyes closed briefly, and for just a moment, Rosa saw past the armor to the devastated father underneath. Someone I trusted to protect her. Yes. How long have you known? Rosa checked her watch. 3.5 hours. I discovered Isabella hiding in your bedroom at 6:15. She was terrified because she knew he comes on Thursdays. I stayed to document his arrival and to make sure he couldn't hurt her tonight. Marco studied her with unsettling intensity. You're a cleaning woman. You have no training for this. You could have called police, or left, or simply stayed out of it entirely. Why didn't you? Rosa thought about her son, about her mother, about every time in her life when she'd needed help and no one had come. Because she's 9 years old, and she was crying and asking for help, and I'm a mother. That's reason enough. One of Marco's men returned with a tablet, pulling up security footage and access logs. Marco watched in silence, his expression growing darker with each screen. Finally, he stopped the playback on a freeze frame, showing the blonde man with the distinctive scar entering the building's resident elevator at 8:20 that evening. Dmitry Volkov, Marco said quietly. The name came out like a death sentence. He's been with my organization for 8 years. I brought him over from Moscow personally. I trusted him with my family's security. The betrayal in Marco's voice was palpable. Rosa understood that in his world, loyalty was currency more valuable than money. Dmitry Volkov hadn't just committed crimes against Isabella. He'd violated the fundamental code that held criminal organizations together. Where is he now? Marco asked the room. One of his men stepped forward. According to GPS on his work phone, he's at the warehouse district. Pier 17. Marco's smile was terrifying. Call him. Tell him I need to see him immediately. Personal matter. Do not mention the girl or anything else. Just get him to my office. The man nodded and stepped away to make the call. Marco turned back to Rosa. You'll need to stay here tonight. With Isabella. I'm assigning 2 of my most trusted people to guard this apartment. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. Understood? Rosa nodded, understanding that she'd just become a material witness in whatever Marco Castellano was planning. There was no walking away now. She'd inserted herself into the inner workings of a criminal organization, and her survival depended on Marco's goodwill and her continued usefulness. What are you going to do? Rosa asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Marco's expression was carved from ice. I'm going to have a conversation with Dmitry Volkov, and then I'm going to make absolutely certain that he never hurts another child for the rest of his very short life. And then I'm going to reevaluate every single person in my organization who had access to my family. I'm going to implement new security protocols. I'm going to make sure that what happened to Isabella never happens to anyone else's child. Marco paused, his voice dropping. And I'm going to figure out how to be a better father than the one who let this happen in the first place. The admission caught Rosa off guard. She'd expected rage, violence, criminal justice delivered outside legal channels. She hadn't expected self-awareness or acceptance of responsibility. Mr. Castellano, Rosa said carefully, I think the most important thing you can do right now is talk to your daughter. Really talk to her. She's been alone in this apartment for 3 weeks, making her own meals, terrified every night that a predator was coming through her door. She needs to know that you're going to be present in her life, not just a protector from a distance, but an actual father. Marco's jaw tightened. For a moment, Rosa thought she'd pushed too far, challenged him too directly. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. I've been. He paused, searching for words. My wife died 6 years ago. Breast cancer. Isabella was 3. I threw myself into work because it was easier than dealing with the grief. I convinced myself that providing financial security was the same as being present. I was wrong. It's not too late, Rosa said softly. She's 9 years old. You have time to fix this. Thank you. The words seemed difficult for him, as if gratitude was a muscle he rarely exercised. For protecting her. For being brave enough to interfere when you had no obligation to do so. He gestured helplessly. For being the person I should have been. Rosa shook her head. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time. But you need to know something, Mr. Castellano. Your daughter is remarkable. Despite everything she's been through, despite being abandoned and terrorized, she's still kind and brave and hopeful. That strength came from somewhere, maybe from her mother's memory, or maybe from knowing that somewhere underneath all your business and power, there was a father who loved her. Don't let that belief be wrong. Marco looked toward the hallway where Isabella had disappeared, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Rosa. You said you work 2 jobs? What's the second one? Cleaning patient rooms at St. Mary's Hospital. Midnight shift. Not anymore. As of right now, you work exclusively for me. Triple your current combined salary. Your mother's medical treatments will be handled by the best doctors in the city, all expenses covered. Your son's education through college, fully funded. Marco's eyes met hers directly. I'm not buying your silence, Mrs. Delgado. Rosa Delgado. Mrs. Delgado. I'm not buying your silence because what happened here tonight needs to be documented and understood, so it never happens again. I'm compensating you because you did something extraordinary when you could have walked away, and that kind of courage deserves recognition. Rosa's eyes filled with tears despite her efforts to maintain composure. The financial security Marco was offering would change her entire life, give her mother access to treatments that could extend her life, give her son opportunities she'd only dreamed about. But she also understood the cost of accepting. What do you need from me? Tonight, stay here with Isabella. Help her feel safe. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what comes next. Marco moved toward the door, his men falling into formation around him. Mrs. Delgado, thank you for loving my daughter enough to risk everything for her. That's a debt I can never fully repay. After Marco and his men left, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. Rosa stood in the living room, her legs suddenly weak as the full weight of the past 4 hours crashed over her. She'd confronted a Mafia boss, documented evidence of child abuse, and fundamentally altered the trajectory of multiple lives, including her own. And she still had to face a traumatized 9-year-old who needed reassurance that the world could be safe again. Rosa walked down the hallway to Isabella's bedroom. The door was partially open, light spilling into the corridor. She knocked softly. Isabella, can I come in? Yes. Isabella was sitting on her bed, her earlier terror replaced by exhaustion. She looked so small in that large bedroom, surrounded by expensive toys and furniture that couldn't comfort or protect her. Your father is going to handle the man who hurt you, Rosa said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He's never going to come here again. I promise you that. What about you? Isabella asked quietly. Are you leaving now? Rosa smiled gently. Actually, your father asked me to stay tonight, to make sure you feel safe. Would that be okay with you? Isabella's face transformed with relief. Really? You'll stay? Really? Can we watch a movie? Like a normal sleepover? Rosa's chest tightened at the simple request. A 9-year-old girl who'd been through trauma that would devastate most adults, asking for something as ordinary as a movie night. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze her. Yes, sweetheart, we can absolutely watch a movie. They settled into the living room with blankets and pillows. Isabella curled against Rosa's side like she'd done it 1,000 times before. They watched an animated film about brave princesses and happy endings, and for a few hours, the darkness of the real world retreated enough to let a child feel like a child again. Around midnight, Isabella fell asleep with her head on Rosa's lap. Rosa sat in the dim light of the television, one hand gently stroking the girl's tangled hair, and thought about the strange paths life sometimes took. She'd walked into this penthouse expecting 3 hours of routine cleaning. Instead, she'd become the protector of a Mafia boss's daughter, the witness to organizational betrayal, and the catalyst for whatever violence was currently unfolding at Pier 17. But looking down at Isabella's sleeping face, finally peaceful after weeks of terror, Rosa knew she'd make the same choices again. Some battles chose you, and when a child needed protection, there was no acceptable option except to fight. The call came at 2:37 in the morning. Rosa had been dozing fitfully on the couch, Isabella still curled against her side, when her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Marco Castellano. She answered quietly, trying not to disturb the sleeping child. Mrs. Delgado. Marco's voice was flat, emotionless in the way that suggested carefully controlled fury. The situation has been handled. Dmitry Volkov will never threaten another child. Rosa didn't ask for details. She didn't need to know whether handled meant arrest or something far more permanent. In Marco Castellano's world, justice followed different rules than the ones Rosa had grown up believing in. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow morning, I'm bringing in a child psychologist who specializes in trauma. Someone I trust completely. Isabella needs professional help processing what happened to her." Marco paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "I'm also clearing my schedule for the next month. My business can survive without my constant attention. My daughter can't." Rosa felt something loosen in her chest. "That's good. That's what she needs most." "Mrs. Delgado, I've made arrangements for your mother to be transferred to Mercy General Hospital tomorrow afternoon. Dr. Sarah Chun is one of the best oncologists in the country. She'll be taking over your mother's care personally. All treatments, all expenses, everything covered." Tears burned Rosa's eyes. Mercy General was where wealthy people went for medical care, where survival rates were dramatically higher than the public hospital where her mother had been receiving minimal treatment. Dr. Chen's name was one Rosa had researched desperately online, knowing her mother could never afford that level of expertise. "Mr. Castellano, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. You saved my daughter. This is the least I can do." Marco's voice softened slightly. "How is she?" Rosa looked down at Isabella's sleeping face. "She's been asleep for about 2 hours. We watched a movie together. She seemed calmer before she fell asleep. I think knowing someone finally believes her and is taking action has helped." "I should have been the person who believed her first," Marco said quietly. "I should have noticed something was wrong. What kind of father doesn't see his own daughter suffering?" Rosa recognized the self-recrimination in his voice. She'd heard it from countless parents over the years, mothers and fathers beating themselves up over missed signs and failed protections. "The kind who was running from his own grief," she said gently. "The kind who thought providing material security was the same as emotional presence. But you know better now. That's what matters." "Is it? Does knowing better undo the damage?" "No, but it prevents future damage, and it gives you a chance to rebuild trust." Rosa shifted carefully, trying not to wake Isabella. "Mr. Castellano, children are remarkably resilient. They forgive in ways adults can't. If you show up now, consistently and genuinely, Isabella will forgive the times you weren't there." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Marco spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'll be there at 7 in the morning. I'm bringing breakfast, the kind Isabella likes, from that bakery near her old school. And I'm planning to spend the entire day with her. No phone calls, no meetings, just father and daughter." "She'll love that." "Mrs. Delgado, don't leave before I get there. I need to speak with you about your new position." After they ended the call, Rosa sat in the darkness of the penthouse living room, holding a sleeping child who wasn't hers but who she claimed as worth protecting anyway. The city lights glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of stories playing out simultaneously in buildings near and far. Rosa thought about her own son, probably asleep in their modest apartment across town, unaware that his mother's life had fundamentally changed in the span of a few hours. She thought about her mother, who would wake tomorrow to news that she was being transferred to a hospital that could actually save her life. She thought about the cost of this miracle. Whatever Marco had done to Dmitry Volkov, Rosa was now complicit through her silence. She'd entered into an unspoken agreement with a criminal organization, accepted money and protection that came from sources she couldn't examine too closely. But when she looked down at Isabella's peaceful face, Rosa found she could live with those compromises. Some choices weren't about moral purity. They were about protecting the vulnerable and accepting that righteousness was a luxury people in desperate circumstances couldn't always afford. Marco Castellano arrived at exactly 7 o'clock as promised. He came alone this time, carrying bags from Bella Vista Bakery that filled the penthouse with the scent of fresh bread and pastries. He'd changed from his expensive suit into casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater that made him look more like a regular father than a criminal enterprise boss. Isabella woke to the sound of her father's voice and the smell of her favorite chocolate croissants. For a moment, confusion crossed her face, as if she couldn't quite believe her father was actually there at breakfast time. Then recognition and cautious hope transformed her expression. "Daddy!" Marco knelt down beside the couch where Isabella sat, his movements careful and deliberate. "Hi, baby girl. I brought breakfast. Your favorite." Isabella looked at Rosa uncertainly, as if seeking permission to believe this was real. Rosa smiled encouragingly. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Your father wants to spend the day with you." The next few minutes were awkward, father and daughter navigating a relationship that had atrophied through neglect and trauma. Marco tried too hard, offering food and conversation with the desperate energy of someone who knew they'd failed catastrophically. Isabella responded with cautious politeness, the kind children develop when they've learned that adult attention is temporary and unreliable. Rosa watched them fumble through breakfast, her heart aching for both of them. This was going to take time. Trust couldn't be rebuilt in a single morning, no matter how many chocolate croissants were involved. After breakfast, Marco asked to speak with Rosa privately in his office. The room was masculine and intimidating, with dark wood furniture and walls lined with books that probably cost more than Rosa's annual salary. Marco gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Mrs. Delgado, I want to formally offer you a position in my household. Not as a cleaning woman, but as Isabella's companion and protector. Someone she trusts, someone who will be present when I can't be, someone who will notice if anything is ever wrong again." Rosa considered the offer carefully. "Mr. Castellano, I'm not a trained nanny or bodyguard. I'm a cleaning woman with a high school education. You're someone my daughter trusts. You're someone who risked everything to protect her when you had no obligation to do so. Those qualifications matter more than any formal training." Marco leaned forward, his expression intense. "I can hire bodyguards and nannies. I can pay for the best security money can buy. But I can't buy the kind of genuine care you showed Isabella last night." What exactly would this position entail? Being present in Isabella's life, picking her up from school, helping with homework, making sure she eats proper meals, being the stable adult presence she's been missing. You'd live here in the penthouse in your own suite. Your son would be welcome to visit any time, or to stay here if that works better for your family. Rosa's mind raced through implications. Living in this penthouse would mean leaving behind her modest apartment, her familiar neighborhood, her hard-won independence. It would mean becoming dependent on Marco Castellano's goodwill and protection. It would mean her son growing up in proximity to wealth and power and criminal enterprise. But it would also mean security. Real security, not just financial survival. It would mean her mother getting the medical care that could save her life. It would mean her son having opportunities she'd never been able to provide. And most importantly, it would mean Isabella had someone looking out for her. "I need to talk to my son," Rosa said finally. "He's 15, old enough to have a say in this decision. And I need to visit my mother, explain what's happening." Marco nodded. "Of course. Take the day. My driver will take you wherever you need to go. But Mrs. Delgado, I need an answer by tonight. Isabella needs stability, and the sooner we establish that, the better." "I understand." Marco's driver, a professional man named Thomas who treated Rosa with unexpected respect, drove her first to her apartment in Queens. The building looked shabbier than ever after a night in the Castellano penthouse, paint peeling from the facade, trash bags piled near the entrance, the persistent smell of cooking and humanity that characterized working-class apartment buildings. Rosa's son Miguel was awake, eating cereal in their tiny kitchen before school. He looked up with surprise when his mother entered at 7:45 in the morning, still wearing her cleaning uniform from the night before. "Mom, I thought you were working the hospital shift. What happened?" Rosa sat down across from him at their scarred kitchen table. Miguel was 15, tall for his age, with his father's dark eyes and Rosa's stubborn chin. He was a good kid, strong grades, no serious trouble, the kind of son any mother would be proud of. "Something happened last night at one of my cleaning jobs. Something that's going to change our lives." She told him everything, or at least an edited version that emphasized protecting a child in danger while downplaying the criminal enterprise elements. Miguel listened with growing amazement, his cereal forgotten. "So let me get this straight," Miguel said when she finished. "You confronted a child molester and then told off a Mafia boss, And now he wants to hire you to live in his penthouse and take care of his daughter? That's the simplified version, yes. Miguel laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. Mom, that's insane. That's literally insane. I know. But you're considering it. Rosa met her son's eyes directly. Miguel, this man is offering to pay for your grandmother's cancer treatment. Real treatment, from doctors who could actually save her life. He's offering to fund your education through college. He's offering us security we've never had. In exchange for what? Miguel asked, his tone suddenly serious. He was 15, not stupid. He understood that deals with men like Marco Castellano came with hidden costs. In exchange for me being present in his daughter's life. Being someone she can trust and depend on. Making sure what happened to her never happens again. Miguel pushed his cereal bowl away, his expression thoughtful. What happened to the guy who hurt her? I don't know the details, but he's been handled. Handled? Miguel repeated the word with understanding beyond his years. As in, he's not coming back. Yes. Miguel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below where his friends were gathering for the walk to school. If you take this job, everything changes. We're not just accepting money. We're accepting protection and obligation and connection to whatever this guy does for a living. I know, but it means Abuela might actually live. It means I could go to a good college instead of working full-time to help with bills. It means you wouldn't have to kill yourself working 2 jobs. Miguel turned back to face her. And it means that little girl has someone looking out for her who actually gives a damn. Rosa felt tears prick her eyes. When had her son become wise enough to see all the angles she was grappling with? What do you think I should do? Miguel crossed back to the table and took his mother's hands. I think you should do what you've always done. Take care of people who need taking care of. If that means living in a penthouse and working for a guy with a questionable business model, then that's what it means. You're okay with this? Mom, you've sacrificed everything for me and Abuela my entire life. You've worked jobs that destroyed your back and your hands. You've gone without so I could have. If this opportunity gives you even a fraction of the security you've given me, then yeah, I'm okay with it. Rosa pulled her son into a tight embrace, grateful beyond words for his maturity and understanding. I love you so much. Love you too, Mom. Now go tell that Mafia boss you'll take his job. And make sure he knows that if he ever disrespects you, he'll have to answer to me. Rosa laughed through her tears. I'll be sure to tell him. The visit to her mother at the hospital was more emotional. Maria Delgado was 68 years old, ravaged by stage 4 breast cancer that had metastasized to her bones and lungs. She'd been receiving minimal treatment at the public hospital, palliative care mostly, because the aggressive interventions that might save her life were far beyond what their insurance and savings could cover. Rosa found her mother awake in her shared room, looking small and frail in the hospital bed. But Maria's eyes were still sharp, still capable of reading her daughter's expression with uncanny accuracy. Something happened, Maria said immediately. Tell me. Rosa pulled a chair close to the bed and took her mother's hand, feeling how thin and fragile it had become. Then she told the whole story, holding nothing back. Her mother deserved the truth. Maria listened in silence, her expression moving through surprise, concern, fear, and finally something that looked like pride. When Rosa finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. You did a brave thing, Maria said finally. A dangerous thing, but brave. I couldn't walk away, Mama. She was 9 years old and terrified. I know. You've always had too much heart for your own good. Maria squeezed Rosa's hand weakly. Your father was the same way, always helping people even when it cost him. Rosa's father had died 12 years earlier, a construction accident that left Rosa and her mother struggling financially. He'd been a good man, the kind who stopped to help strangers change flat tires and who volunteered at the community center on weekends. Mr. Castellano is offering to transfer you to Mercy General, to have Dr. Chun take over your care. Mama, she's one of the best oncologists in the country. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Rosa, no. We don't take money from men like that. We don't become obligated. Mama, please. Let me do this. Let me save your life the way you saved mine by working 3 jobs to put me through school, by sacrificing everything so I could have opportunities. At what cost? Rosa, men like Marco Castellano don't give something for nothing. There's always a price. The price is that I take care of his daughter. That I give her the same love and attention you gave me. Is that really so terrible?" Maria studied her daughter's face, seeing the determination and desperate hope written there. "You've already decided, haven't you?" "Yes. But I need your blessing, Mama. I need to know you're okay with this." Maria was quiet for a long time, her thumb stroking the back of Rosa's hand in the same soothing pattern she'd used when Rosa was a child. "When I was your age, your father and I were so poor we sometimes went to bed hungry, so you could eat. We made choices that scared us because the alternative was worse. I understand desperation, Mija. I understand doing questionable things for good reasons. So you're okay with this? I'm terrified, but I'm also proud of you for being brave enough to protect that child. And if accepting help from a complicated man means you get to stop working yourself to death, then maybe that's not such a terrible price." Maria pulled Rosa close. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Men who live in that world, they have different rules. Don't forget who you are." "I won't, Mama. I promise." By 6 o'clock that evening, Rosa was back at the Castellano penthouse with her decision made. Marco was in the living room with Isabella, actually playing a board game on the floor like regular fathers did. The sight was so incongruous that Rosa paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Isabella noticed her first. "Rosa, you're back. Are you staying?" The hope in the child's voice decided any lingering doubts Rosa might have had. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm staying." Isabella launched herself across the room, wrapping her arms around Rosa's waist with the kind of desperate affection that spoke of attachment formed through crisis. "Really? You're going to live here?" "Really?" Marco stood slowly, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes reflecting something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Delgado, I'm glad you've accepted. I'll have my staff prepare the guest suite for you and your son. You can move in whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow," Rosa said. "We'll move in tomorrow." The next 3 months transformed all of their lives in ways none of them could have predicted. Rosa and Miguel moved into the penthouse, occupying a suite that was larger than their entire former apartment. Miguel adjusted with the adaptability of teenagers, simultaneously awed by the luxury and determined not to let it change who he was. He continued attending his same public school, maintained his same friend group, but now had access to tutors and resources that improved his already strong grades. Rosa's mother was transferred to Mercy General, where Dr. Chin performed a comprehensive evaluation and started aggressive treatment that wouldn't have been possible at the public hospital. The cancer was advanced, but Dr. Chin was cautiously optimistic that they'd caught it in time to make a significant difference. But the most dramatic transformation was in Isabella. The child psychologist Marco hired, Dr. Patricia Monroe, was a specialist in childhood trauma who'd worked with survivors of abuse for over 20 years. She met with Isabella 3 times a week, creating a safe space for the girl to process what had happened and begin the long journey toward healing. Rosa was present for most of these sessions, at Dr. Monroe's request. The psychologist explained that Isabella had formed a critical attachment to Rosa during the crisis, and that attachment could be leveraged therapeutically. "Rosa represents safety to Isabella," Dr. Monroe explained during one of their private consultations. "She was the first adult who believed her, protected her, and followed through on promises. That's incredibly powerful for a child who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted." Rosa watched Isabella slowly emerge from the shell of fear she'd been trapped in. The flinching at sudden noises decreased. The nightmares became less frequent. The girl who'd been making her own meals and essentially raising herself began acting like a 9-year-old again, asking for help with homework and wanting bedtime stories and requesting that Rosa braid her hair before school. But the most significant change was in Marco himself. True to his word, he cleared his schedule for a month. Business associates and criminal enterprise operations had to function without his constant oversight. Marco was present for breakfast every morning, drove Isabella to school himself, attended her therapy sessions when Dr. Monroe suggested it would be beneficial. Rosa watched him fumble through the mechanics of active fatherhood, making mistakes and learning, and gradually becoming more comfortable in a role he'd abdicated for too long. He learned that Isabella liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, not straight across. He discovered she had a talent for drawing that no one had nurtured. He sat through painful therapy sessions where his daughter described feeling abandoned and alone, and he accepted responsibility instead of making excuses. It wasn't perfect. Marco was still Marco Castellano, still a man whose business involved violence and corruption and activities Rosa tried not to think about too carefully. Phone calls would come late at night, and he'd disappear into his office with a hardness in his eyes that reminded Rosa exactly who she was working for. But with Isabella, he was learning to be gentle, learning to be present, learning that power meant nothing if you couldn't protect the people who mattered most. One evening, about 10 weeks after Rosa had first discovered Isabella crying in the master bedroom, she found Marco standing outside his daughter's room, watching through the partially open door as Isabella slept peacefully. "She doesn't flinch anymore," Marco said quietly when he noticed Rosa's presence. "When doors open, when people approach her, she's not constantly afraid. Dr. Monroe says she's making remarkable progress. Children are resilient when they have support." Marco turned to face Rosa, his expression vulnerable in ways she rarely saw. "Mrs. Delgado, I need you to understand something. What you did for Isabella, the courage you showed in protecting her, that changed everything. Not just for her, but for me. You would have figured it out eventually." "No, I wouldn't have. I was too caught up in my own world, too convinced that providing material security was enough. You showed me what real protection looks like, what real love looks like." Marco's voice roughened with emotion. "My wife, Isabella's mother, she made me promise before she died that I'd never let our daughter grow up feeling alone. And I broke that promise, until you reminded me what was important." Rosa felt tears building despite her efforts at composure. "You're a good father, Mr. Castellano. You just needed to remember that power isn't the same as presence. Call me Marco. We've been living under the same roof for 10 weeks. I think we're past formalities." Rosa smiled slightly. "Marco, then. But you should know that Isabella told me something yesterday during breakfast. She said she wished her mother could see how you've changed. She said she thinks her mother would be proud." Marco's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Did she really say that?" "Yes. And she also said that having me here makes her feel like she has a mother again, even though no one could ever replace her real mother. She said our family feels complete now." "Our family," Marco repeated softly. "That's what this has become, hasn't it? Some strange, unconventional family." Rosa thought about her own son, studying in his room down the hall. She thought about her mother, responding better than expected to treatment at Mercy General. She thought about Isabella, sleeping peacefully without fear for the first time in months. And she thought about Marco, learning to be the father his daughter needed. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose it has. 3 months became 6 months. 6 months became a year." Isabella's 12th birthday party was celebrated with friends from school, excessive cake, and Marco's presence throughout the entire event. He'd become the kind of father who showed up to school performances and parent-teacher conferences, who knew his daughter's friends by name and her favorite subjects in school. Rosa's mother's cancer went into remission, a miracle that Dr. Chin attributed to aggressive treatment combined with genetic factors and plain luck. Maria moved into the penthouse as well, occupying another suite and becoming the grandmother figure Isabella had been missing since her own grandmother lived in Sicily. Miguel graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to Columbia University, though Marco insisted on covering additional expenses for housing and living costs. The teenager, who'd been facing a future of community college, and work had transformed into a young man with opportunities Rosa had only dreamed of providing. And Rosa herself had evolved from invisible cleaning woman to indispensable member of an unconventional household. Isabella called her Tia Rosa now, an honorary title that made Rosa's heart swell every time she heard it. Marco consulted her on important decisions regarding Isabella's education and activities, valuing her perspective in ways that acknowledged she'd become far more than hired help. But the criminal empire aspects of Marco's life remained a shadow Rosa couldn't ignore. She'd hear phone conversations conducted in Italian, voices tense with implications of violence, and business conducted outside legal boundaries. She'd see men arrive at the penthouse for meetings, their bearing and expressions speaking of dangerous occupations. Marco kept that world carefully separate from Isabella's life, from Rosa's daily experience. But it was always there, lurking at the edges of their unconventional family dynamic. One night, Almost 18 months after Rosa had first discovered Isabella's secret, she found Marco in his office at 2 in the morning. He was staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city beyond, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. "Can't sleep?" Rosa asked from the doorway. Marco glanced back at her with a tired smile. "Too many thoughts." "You?" "Same." Rosa entered the office, sitting in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Want to talk about it?" Marco was quiet for a long moment. "Do you ever regret it? The decision you made that night? Getting involved in all of this?" Rosa considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I think about how much simpler my life used to be, how I understood the rules and my place in the world. This life, living here, being part of your world, it's complicated in ways I never anticipated. But when I see Isabella smile without fear, when I watch her being a normal 12-year-old girl who worries about homework and friends instead of predators coming through her door, I know I made the right choice. Everything else is just noise." Marco nodded slowly. "She asked me yesterday if you and I were going to get married." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that adults have complicated relationships, and that you're here because you care about her, not because of romantic feelings for me." Marco turned from the window to face Rosa directly. "But I've been thinking about her question a lot. Marco, I'm not proposing. I know that would be inappropriate for about 1,000 different reasons. But I want you to know that I value you, Rosa. Not just as someone who takes care of my daughter, but as a person who fundamentally changed my understanding of what matters in life." Rosa felt emotions swirling that she wasn't ready to examine. "I value you too. You're a good man, underneath all the complicated business. You're learning to be the father Isabella deserves. That's all that matters." "Is it? Or is there something else developing here that we're both pretending not to notice?" Rosa stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his conversation. "Marco, I'm employed by you. Isabella depends on me. Your mother lives here. The power dynamics are impossible. Even if there were feelings, which I'm not saying there are, acting on them would be irresponsible." "You're right. Of course you're right." Marco's smile was sad. "But you didn't say there weren't feelings." Rosa walked to the office door, pausing at the threshold. "Good night, Marco." "Good night, Rosa." She returned to her suite, her mind churning with thoughts she'd been suppressing for months. Somewhere along the way, between crisis and recovery, between learning to live in this unconventional household and watching Marco transform into an attentive father, feelings had developed that were both undeniable and impossible. She cared about Isabella as if the girl were her own daughter. She'd come to appreciate her mother's presence and Miguel's growth. And she developed feelings for Marco that went beyond professional respect or simple gratitude. But acknowledging those feelings would mean confronting the fundamental imbalance in their relationship. She was employed by him, dependent on his goodwill and generosity. Her mother's continued treatment, her son's educational opportunities, Isabella's well-being, all of it hinged on maintaining this carefully balanced dynamic. Romantic involvement would shatter that balance, create complications that could hurt everyone involved, especially Isabella. Rosa resolved to bury those feelings deeper, to maintain the professional boundaries that kept their unusual family functioning. Some prices were too high, some risks too dangerous. But over the following months, those boundaries became increasingly difficult to maintain. Small moments of connection, late-night conversations, shared laughter over Isabella's antics, the way Marco's eyes softened when he looked at Rosa, all of it gradually wore down her carefully constructed defenses. Isabella, with the perceptiveness of children, noticed everything. She started making comments about how nice it would be if Rosa was her real mother. She arranged situations that left Rosa and Marco alone together. She enlisted Miguel and Maria in her matchmaking efforts, creating a conspiracy of people who could see what Rosa and Marco were determinedly pretending didn't exist. 2 years after that first night, on the anniversary of the day Rosa had discovered Isabella's secret, Marco organized a small dinner to celebrate. Just family, Marco, Isabella, Rosa, Miguel, and Maria. No business associates, no hired staff, just the 5 people who'd become their own unconventional unit. After dinner, Isabella presented Rosa with a gift, a photograph she'd drawn, showing all 5 of them together with the caption, "My family," written in careful letters. I wanted you to have this, Isabella said, her eyes shining. Because you're not just Tia, Rosa. You're the person who saved me. The person who helped my dad remember how to be a dad. The person who makes everything better. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face as she pulled Isabella into an embrace. You're pretty special yourself, sweetheart. I know, Isabella said with 12-year-old confidence. Then she looked meaningfully between Rosa and Marco. I also know that adults sometimes need permission from kids to do things they're scared to do. So consider this official permission. Just in case you were wondering. Miguel laughed. Subtle, Isabella. Really subtle. Maria smiled knowingly. Children see what we spend so much energy pretending doesn't exist. Marco stood slowly, crossing to where Rosa sat with Isabella still in her arms. He held out his hand. Walk with me. Rosa took his hand, allowing him to lead her to the balcony overlooking the city. Behind them, through the glass doors, she could see Isabella giving enthusiastic thumbs up while Miguel and Maria laughed. She's not wrong, you know, Marco said quietly. About us being scared. About needing permission. Marco, we've been over this. The complications. What if we stopped making complications an excuse? What if we acknowledge that something real has developed between us? Something that isn't about employment or obligation or gratitude. Rosa looked out at the city lights, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From invisible cleaning woman to essential family member. From struggling to survive to living in security she'd never imagined. From being alone to being surrounded by people who'd become her family. What if it doesn't work? She asked quietly. What if romantic involvement ruins what we've built? Isabella would be devastated. And what if it does work? What if we spend the rest of our lives pretending not to love each other because we're scared of change? Marco took both her hands, turning her to face him. Rosa, you saved my daughter's life. You saved my life, really, by forcing me to see what I'd been missing. You've become essential to everything that matters. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking if you'd be willing to explore what this could become. Rosa felt her carefully maintained defenses crumbling. You're really terrible at maintaining professional boundaries. You know that? Marco smiled. I'm a Mafia boss. Professional boundaries aren't really my strong suit. That's not remotely reassuring. No, but it's honest. Marco's expression grew serious. Rosa, I love you. I've been in love with you for over a year now. I watch you with Isabella, with your son, with your mother. I see your kindness and strength and the way you make everyone around you better. I don't want to hide that anymore. Rosa's heart hammered in her chest. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I do. Even though you're complicated and dangerous and involved in business, I don't ask about because I'm afraid of the answers. I know. I'm not going to pretend I'm a good man. But with you, with Isabella, I'm trying to be better than I was. That's all anyone can do. Try to be better. Marco leaned down slowly, giving Rosa time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, when she instead reached up to meet him, their kiss was gentle and tentative and full of all the emotions they'd been suppressing for so long. Behind them, through the glass doors, they could hear Isabella's excited squeal and Miguel's laughter and Maria's voice saying something about finally in Spanish. When they finally pulled apart, Rosa was smiling through tears. Well, I guess our unconventional family just got more unconventional. Is that a problem? No. Honestly, I don't think it is. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love the story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.